you ever witness a man build an empire just to burn it down with his own hands? That's what we saw unfold with Kody Brown, the self-proclaimed patriarch of a once massive plural family. But the real fire wasn't lit by outsiders. It came from inside the house, and when Meri and Janelle finally said enough, everything he'd buried for years erupted into the open. Hey everyone, I'm Sarah, and welcome back to TLC Sister Wives Recap. If you love real talk, truth-telling, and deep commentary on the emotional chaos of sister wives, you're in the right place. Make sure to subscribe and drop a comment, especially if you've ever screamed at your screen watching Cody pull another stunt, because today, we're breaking down the moment the cracks in Kody and Robyn's carefully staged image finally shattered, and the revolution began. For years, they pushed the story of unity, of sacrifice, of this big, loving family that just needed a little faith. But behind closed doors, there were bruises, not physical, but emotional, financial, and deeply spiritual. What started as murmurs in earlier seasons, like when Janelle moved into that RV, while Robyn lived comfortably in her sprawling home, grew louder. You didn't have to be a genius to see it. The favoritism, the erasure, the lies dressed up as leadership, and the tension, it didn't fade, it hardened. Meri, after enduring years of emotional distance, catfishing scandal, fallout, and public shame, held her tongue. Janelle, who worked, raised her kids, and never complained, started asking tough questions, ones that Cody couldn't answer without showing his hand. When the truth finally spilled, that financial documents had been altered, land reassigned without their signatures, and investments erased, the shock wasn't just on Meri and Janelle's faces, it was all of ours. They weren't just walking away anymore. They were coming back for what was theirs. The lawsuit wasn't a storyline twist, it was a reckoning. A direct response to years of being ignored, sidelined, and replaced in a system that claimed to be about spiritual marriage but operated more like a power game. This wasn't just about land or money, it was about betrayal, about stolen decades. And suddenly, the man who once stood tall as the head of this so-called united family was looking a lot smaller under the weight of his own decisions. And Robyn, she didn't look like the cherished final wife anymore. She looked scared, because the walls were closing in. We all watched it unfold piece by piece, season after season, but no one expected just how deep it really went. On the surface, it was Janelle living in an RV, Meri quietly fading into the background, and Robyn enjoying her plush two-story Flagstaff house like she won some sort of wife lottery. But under the surface, there were buried truths, and they weren't just ugly, they were stolen. Let's start with what Janelle revealed. It wasn't just that she had nowhere to live. It was that she had sacrificed everything. She cashed out her 401k, her life savings, to invest in the family's dream of Coyote Pass. She believed in the vision, in the idea that one day, they'd all live on the land they built together. But when the dust settled, her name wasn't even on the title. That wasn't just a clerical error, that was betrayal in ink. While Janelle parked her RV in the Arizona heat, literally showering in a tank and making do in the middle of nowhere, Robyn was inside air conditioning, sipping from custom mugs in a fully furnished home that was bought, in part, with family resources. Cody claimed it was necessary, that it made sense. But what didn't make sense was how the wife who gave up the most had the least. And Meri, her story is just as devastating. After decades of emotional labor, loyalty, and supporting Cody's ambitions, she was wiped off the books, literally. Her contributions to the family's shared businesses, like the B&B, the clothing ventures, all those behind-the-scenes duties, were quietly erased. No stake, no equity, no voice, and worst of all, no explanation. They weren't losing control, they were being shut out, silently. And then came the courtroom. When Janelle and Meri lawyered up, it wasn't out of spite. It was because the evidence was undeniable. Legal documents were filed that showed Cody had reassigned property rights without their knowledge. Land originally discussed as family-owned was quietly shifted, and guess whose names were on the updated titles? That's right, just Cody and Robyn. And the thing is, these weren't just numbers on a screen. There were verbal commitments, caught on camera. Old episodes showed Cody promising shared ownership, discussing joint finances. The fans remembered. The lawyers remembered, the judge remembered. So when the evidence was laid out, years of investment, testimony, video clips, and signed deeds, the court couldn't ignore it. Janelle and Meri hadn't walked away. They'd been pushed out, rewritten, and the restitution order, $1.32 million. Not just money. That was the price of dignity reclaimed. This wasn't just about property. It was a message. You don't get to erase people and expect them to stay silent forever. And the courtroom gave them the mic. If Act 2 was about the courtroom reckoning, then what came next was the public unraveling, and no one fell harder than Robyn Brown. For years, Robyn held on to that title, the last wife standing, Cody's emotional center. The loyal one. She had the house, the legal marriage, the control. But once the court records went public and the clips started circulating, that image shattered, fast. Fans had long sensed something wasn't right. The tears that came to Isley, the helpless, shrugged when tough questions were asked, the way she always seemed just a little too above the struggle. But now, there was no spinning it. When legal documents surfaced showing Robyn's name on land deeds that had been stripped from Meri and Janelle, the timeline clicked into place. One TikTok after another, some getting millions of views stitched together Robyn's on-camera denials with cold hard facts from real paperwork. Reddit threads that used to speculate now had receipts. Viewers pointed out how Robyn had signed property forms 2 years ago, the same ones she claimed she knew nothing about in interviews. It was no longer speculation. It was exposure. The reaction was brutal. Gone were the days of poor Robyn just trying to hold the family together. Now, she was the one seen holding the pen while others were erased. And the backlash didn't stop with fans. Her own home began to fracture. On screen, we saw the emotional toll play out. Her daughter Aurora, once sheltered and soft-spoken, began showing signs of distress. Reports even circulated that she had suffered a panic attack after reading comments online labeling her mom the scammer wife. Brianna, who had once appeared joyful on camera, pulled away from school and avoided being filmed. Dayton, the quietest of all, reportedly stayed in his room for days, avoiding even Robyn. It wasn't just the internet talking anymore. It was her own walls closing in. Robyn had once claimed she just wanted a functioning family, but the optics, the silence, the signature, the side-by-side comparisons of her tears, and the paperwork told a different story. A more sobering one. She wasn't seen as the cherished last wife anymore. She became the symbol of the fallout, the face of favoritism, the image of manipulation disguised as martyrdom. And in a cruel twist of irony, the woman who once held all the cards was now alone at the table, not just losing fans, but losing sympathy. Because when the truth finally catches up, no amount of tears can wash away the ink. By the time the dust settled in court, something had visibly snapped in Kody Brown. The once proud patriarch, who used to strut through family meetings and confessionals like he was untouchable, was now pacing around his empty home, muttering to himself, staring at his phone like it had turned against him. And, in a way, it had. Kody had built his entire identity around being the head of a massive, polygamous family, 4 wives, 18 kids. A TLC spotlight that followed his every word. But when Meri and Janelle's lawsuits stripped the illusion of fairness away, and Robyn's role in the land transfers came to light, that structure collapsed, and Cody was left standing in the middle of the wreckage, arms outstretched, looking for someone else to blame. He became paranoid, angry, spinning. According to what we saw on the show and what insiders later confirmed, Cody shut himself away in the home he and Robyn shared. Curtains drawn. Phone buzzing with unread messages from lawyers, producers, and worse, silence from most of his kids. He still couldn't understand. He still believed he was the victim, that he had just been trying to lead, that his spiritual authority had been misunderstood. But TLC didn't buy it anymore. Not after court documents proved just how uneven things had become, not just emotionally, but financially and legally. Behind the scenes, producers held emergency meetings. Cody's contract was no longer their priority. His name was fading fast from the news story arc. Fans weren't rooting for him anymore. They were outraged. Ratings were up, but sympathy for him was gone. And then came the most devastating part for Cody, the shift in his children. Gabriel had already confronted him on camera, tearfully describing how Cody ignored him while he was sick with COVID. Gwendolyn spoke openly on YouTube about the favoritism and how it shaped her view of her father. Even Madison and Logan, once neutral, began posting photos that clearly aligned themselves with Janelle and Christine, and made no mention of Cody. Hunter, who once walked quietly in his father's shadow, stepped out with support for his mom. "He never saw us," Gabriel had once said. "Not really." And now the whole country saw that Cody was no longer the leader. He wasn't even the villain. He was becoming something worse, a forgotten man in his own family's story, pacing behind drawn curtains while the world moved on without him. When the court ruled in favor of Meri and Janelle, it wasn't just a legal win, it was a spiritual shift. After years of silence, compromise, and being pushed into the background, these women stood tall and reclaimed what had always been theirs: Coyote Pass. The land that was once used as a symbol of unity and future promise had been twisted into a tool of exclusion and betrayal. But now, it was theirs again. And this time, it was on their terms. Janelle returned to that red Arizona earth, not as someone begging to be seen, but as a woman who had earned her place with every dollar she saved, every sacrifice she made, every night she spent in that RV while Robyn and Cody built a house she was never invited into, and Meri, quiet, steady, and so often underestimated, stood right beside her, holding the deed that proved she was never just an accessory in someone else's life. She had built this family too, she had paid into it, and now she was taking her power back. The vision was no longer about Cody's dream compound. It was about healing, about women finding their voices again. Janelle talked about creating a space for tiny homes, affordable, beautiful, and sustainable, a place where women could breathe. Meri dreamed of a retreat where those who had survived religious trauma, emotional neglect, or years of spiritual guilt could come and simply rest. For the first time in years, there was no competition between them, no silent resentment, just purpose, pride, and peace. And they weren't doing it alone. Christine, watching from Utah, sent her love and support, smiling in her new kitchen, surrounded by her fiancé, her kids, and the kind of emotional warmth she never got from Cody. She'd fought her fight already, but she knew what this meant for Meri and Janelle. She knew what it cost them, and she cheered them on every step of the way. Their children were right there too, not just supporting, but helping, painting signs, hauling supplies, brainstorming designs. This was no longer a show about wives trying to win one man's attention. This was about building something new from the ashes, something their daughters and granddaughters could look up to. The sisterhood that once existed only in name had finally come alive. Not as wives, not as rivals, but as women who had survived the same storm and now stood together, rebuilding something better, not for him, for themselves. As the dust settled over Coyote Pass, something truly historic happened. LC made its move. Quietly, without any grand announcement, they shifted the spotlight, no longer centering the show around Cody's patriarchal chaos or Robyn's tears. The network began planning something bold, something overdue, a spin-off, one that finally centered the women who had carried the emotional weight of the show for over a decade. Christine, Janelle, and Meri weren't just rebuilding their lives, they were leading a cultural shift. And this time, the narrative was theirs. Christine's home in Utah became a hub of strength and laughter, where she and her daughters planned new traditions without fear. Janelle's tiny home project started breaking ground. Meri's retreat center began welcoming women with similar stories, women who had once felt voiceless, invisible, erased. Together, they created something TLC had never aired before: recovery, dignity, and peace, born from years of quiet survival. The cameras didn't have to dramatize it. The power was already there in their truth. But the storm wasn't done for everyone. In the background, real questions began to surface. Viewers started connecting dots from old episodes, conversations about taxes, land transfers, bank accounts, clips of Cody brushing off questions, Robyn avoiding details, the money trail that never quite added up. And then, whispers of the IRS. Public records showed signatures, property filings, commingled finances. It wasn't hard to see why something bigger might be looming. And then came the moment no one expected: Cody, back in court. But this time, no fanfare. No wives beside him, no family in the crowd. Just a tired man with no crew, no contract, no more excuses. The accusations weren't about love or marriage, they were about paperwork, classification, missing money. And for the first time, even Cody didn't have the energy to fight. His voice broke. "I just wanted order," he said. But the silence in that courtroom said it all. He didn't want order. He wanted control. And that was gone now. At the Ember Ridge retreat, the shift was complete. In one emotional evening, Leon and Aspen stood in front of a packed room of women. No cameras, no scripts, just truth. Leon spoke first, voice trembling but steady. We spent our lives trying to be good enough for a father who defined love by obedience. We're done. Aspen followed. My mom used to cry quietly in her room. Today, she builds something with her own hands. That's power. And that was the legacy now. Not Cody, not polygamy, not the illusion of family unity, but resilience, growth, sisterhood, under the Arizona sun. As the women sat around a fire pit with their adult children beside them, and the past finally behind them, there was no rivalry left, just strength, healing, and a new sister wives legacy that belonged to them, and them alone.